Good morning, everybody. My name is Chris Konetsky. I'm the president and group publisher of BPC. As you find your seat, can we help us warm up our panel a little bit here and give them a big round of applause for being with us today? Welcome to our third Power Breakfast of the year. Again, my name is Chris Konetsky. I'm the group publisher and president for Business Publications Corporation, which produces the Business Record and DSM Magazine. Thanks for joining us this morning for what I'm sure is going to be an interesting and dynamic conversation on generations in the workforce. Before we get to the rest of the event, I want to introduce you to a new team member today. Back in July here at BPC, we announced a leadership transition plan that would be taking place through the end of the year. And as I assume the president role as part of that previously announced transition plan, we're happy to introduce a new member to the team, Lawrence Cunningham, as BPC's new Chief Growth Officer. Lawrence is going to be, give Lawrence an applause. Lawrence is going to be joining our executive leadership team, and he's going to play a key role in driving our strategic growth as a company. He's an experienced senior-level executive with a dynamic, forward-thinking mindset. He's got a deep passion for media and has been involved in marketing for a number of years. He's got great roots here in Des Moines. He's a past 40 under 40 himself. I see him standing in the back. So Lawrence, go ahead, give us a big wave. You have an opportunity at BPC to be able to see and hear, and we always talk about our audience and the great folks that we get to work for each and every day. But it's nice to be able to introduce somebody new to the crowd so they can hear and see and feel that. So if you give him one more big round of applause for joining the BPC team. All right, before we start today's program, we're going to introduce today's sponsors. First up is a longtime Power Breakfast supporter, Bankers Trust. Since 1917, the bank has been driven by an unwavering commitment to the success of customers and communities. We're pleased to have everybody's favorite millennial, Don Coffin, here today, president and CEO of Bankers Trust. Don, come on up. Give Don a round of applause.
Well, thank you all for being here. Thank you to the panelists for your time and expertise. Thanks for Business Record for planning this, and most of all, thanks for all of you for taking time of your morning to attend this. Today's topic is sure to be an interesting one, and like many organizations, our multi-generational workforce at Bankers Trust spans from baby boomers, maybe that's me, to Gen Z. Each generation certainly has its own unique characteristics. It's been certainly clear to see, especially in the last few years, from how those preferences have shaped what employees want from their workplace. Not to mention changes in communication. So I have a 25-year-old, and I'm not the best at texting, and certainly not the best at emojis, but he sends me a note. This has been a little while ago. He sends me a note, and I give him a thumbs up, right? The yellow thumbs up, which I was proud that I found and sent to him. He calls me and said there's something wrong, because he took it as that was a passive-aggressive sort of way of saying, yeah, thanks, instead of thanks. So, and in fact, if you type the word thanks and put a period after it, it's the same thing. It's the same thing kind of as a thumbs up. Anybody know that? I didn't know that. You got to have an exclamation point, I think. Is that true? Anybody? Okay, never mind. All right, it's important to make sure, I won't even get into the slang that I've learned from some of our interns especially, so that's all good, and another day. It's important to make sure we're finding new ways to support our team members across all these generations. One of the ways we do this at Bankers Trust is through our employee research groups, such as the Young Professionals Committee. It's called the Next Gen, which we often get younger employees together to connect with each other, as well as learn from other team members at various experience levels throughout the bank. So whether it's a group like Next Gen, helping generations learn from one another, someone from Gen X providing input on our culture at the bank, or a millennial sharing insights that help the bank think differently about the banking products, tools, and service that we provide for customers, we make sure employee voices are heard no matter what generation they're from. It's just good business. Thanks again to the Business Record for bringing us together today for these important discussions, and thank you all for being here. So, thanks.
Thank you, Don, and I'm glad you didn't try any of the slang remarks today. Sometimes I think it might just be a giant joke that they're trying to get you to say something that's inappropriate at a time. So thanks for avoiding that for us today. As a top accounting firm, our next sponsor is Forvis Mazars, and they've been serving over 50 states, and they're driven by a commitment to deliver an unmatched client experience. Joining us today is Marty Fredericks. He's a partner with Forvis Mazars. Please welcome Marty. Give him a round of applause.
If Don's a millennial, I don't know what that makes me. Longer than a millennial, the next generation, right? At Forvis Mazars, I've had the unique opportunity to do this in the past, and pretty, you see how not only the generations are changing, you see how our business is changing. I've done this as a representative of a regional CPA firm. I've done this as a member of a national CPA firm. And then now as a global CPA firm, when Forvis merged with Mazars on June 1st of this year, no matter what level we are, we're operating and providing customer service and client service. This is an important event, and we appreciate the opportunity. Now, in Des Moines, I focus a lot on communication companies throughout the Midwest. But Forvis Mazars, we've become global, as I mentioned. We're up to 7,000 employees, and Chris mentioned one of our mottos is trying to present an unmatched client experience, and it doesn't matter if that is what generation's doing that. At a CPA firm, all our teams have every single generation working on it, and this is vital to be able to work with all different levels. Today's topic is a little bit near and dear to my heart. So when I saw this come across, I had to go dig something out. I know you guys can't read this or see this, but this is a 2016 presentation that I did entitled Thriving in a Multi-Generational Work Environment. Okay? So I must be the expert on this, so if you guys need some help, I'll let you know. But the point being, this is nothing new, right? And that's part of what my presentation was about. And if you want a little research here, there's a 1968 Life magazine cover, okay? Don might have been born in 68. I wasn't quite born yet, but 1968 Life magazine cover that said the generational gap, So this goes back to 1968 when people were dealing with this. And there's the quote from the author, George Orwell. He was a writer, author, really smarter probably than myself. But the quote is, each generation imagines itself to be more intelligent than the one that went before it, and wiser than the one that came after it. So think about that a little bit. More intelligent than the one that came before it, but then later on, I'm wiser than the one coming after me. So that's a really interesting quote. That's what every generation thinks and every generation goes through. So, what we're dealing with right now that I know a lot of you are in all your businesses, we are seeing many baby boomers retire from CPA firms, right? And if you go and read about CPA firms, private equity's coming to CPA firms, and we're always trying to make sure that we're able to offer the best staff and the best people to go out and do these jobs. And, we're seeing more and more of, AI and other things being able to take over baby boomers, and we all got to be prepared, for that next transition. And as leaders at our organizations, that you got to embrace it, right? You're going to do business different now than we ever have before. So with that, thank you, speakers, for coming in today and enlighten us, and hopefully you can. I'll give you my slides later if there's something that you guys missed today, okay? But yeah, once again, thank you. Thank you for the business record, Chris and his team, for having us, and looking forward to today. Thank you.
Thanks, Marty. We're excited to welcome a new sponsor to the Power Breakfast series this year, Lean Techniques. Whether it's digital transformation, IT modernization, or software delivery, Lean Techniques helps our clients create solutions to help run their business. Please welcome Daniel Brummer, Chief Growth Officer at Lean Techniques. Give a round of applause.
All right, good morning, everyone. Danielle Brummer, I'm really happy to be here on behalf of Lean Techniques. And of course, I want to start by thanking the business record. You guys have done a really great job of bringing this community together. And I think I want to make a point to say that this forum has really been a positive impact for Lean Techniques. We've made a lot of new connections here over the last year, and of course have had the benefit of actually having new partnerships as well. So again, appreciate the series and the community that you guys have been able to create here. As I was thinking about the discussion today on a multi-generational workforce, I reflected on how this very diversity has strengthened our organization. At Lean Techniques, we see firsthand the blend of experiences from seasoned professionals and fresh perspectives from our younger generations. It fosters a more innovative and sometimes spirited environment. Just 2 weeks ago, we had 2 team members debating over who had more decades of experience, another admitting he can't work without a mouse, and our youngest developed in a fully remote workforce, not knowing an Atari or what a CD-ROM is, but also likely the most equipped to inform us on how to reach a different, more digitally inclined audience. While we can all agree we need to understand how to lead and serve a more diverse workforce while we're all here today, I believe there will be also benefits reflected in how we serve our customers. A prediction I came across just last night that I found rather fascinating was that in 2024, 52% of global B2B buyers who made large purchases, so $1 million or above, worked directly with a vendor, and the vendor processed that with a rep. The inverse is going to be true in 2025. That's next year. So that requires the website, your products, or the digital experience to be such that it's a click to purchase, right? And this is kind of where I'd plug our digital transformation services, right? So be mindful of that. At Lean Techniques, we understand a modern and resilient digital enterprise is about more than embracing the latest technologies. It's about building a new type of organization, what we're going to learn about here today as well. We help our customers in providing expertise and the tools necessary for leaders to thrive in a more dynamic and complex environment, emphasizing the importance of creating a discipline of learning and embracing change as an agent for growth. Today's topic on evolving generational dynamics in the workforce is both timely and critical. It's clear that we need to lead, communicate, and structure our organizations is shifting, and as leaders, it's important to understand the unique needs and priorities and strengths of each generation. But equally important is recognizing the tremendous opportunities that come from its diversity when leveraged as an advantage. So I'm really excited to hear from all of you as we explore the future of leadership and the ways we can continue to grow in a multi-generational workforce. We build better when we build together. Thank you.
Thanks, Danielle. Well, our moderator today is going to be Emily Wood. She's our special projects editor, and she's devoted considerable time and energy working on articles and initiatives that deal directly with and explore the differences and similarities between multiple generations that now make up our workforce. As our sponsors have talked about today, today's topic is not necessarily a new one, but the ingredients have continued to change. So whether that was 1968, whether that was, we did a power breakfast in 2013, I believe it was, specifically on millennials entering the workforce and what the dynamic was in that place. This topic is one that's going to continue to evolve over time, and there's always going to be new aspects to be being explored. And Emily is really well positioned to help us do that today. She leads our 40 Under 40 effort. She's been integral and fearless and also works closely with our Women of Influence. So she works truly with folks across the generational spectrum. She's got a passion for understanding dynamics that age can play in the workforce, and as a leader herself, at an age that sometimes folks have, and her and I have had a number of discussions around this. She started with Business Record at an age and was our editor at an age that oftentimes people would stop and pause and question, say, are you sure? How old are you again? And so she's navigated some of these dynamics herself in the workplace and as a leader in our company. She's got a deep knowledge of the topic, and she's going to do a fantastic job guiding the discussion today. I will say there's one thing I think she might have made a mistake on, and I think she's going to have to answer to Miss Connie Weimer, who's here today. We have all the generations recognized, but I think we missed the greatest generation. Is that what I understand, Connie? Where are you at? Connie, we maybe needed you to come up on the panel today to round out our panel. So we've got everybody represented. Emily, come on up and get things started for us today. Give her a round of applause.
Thank you, Chris. So just to kind of set the stage here, earlier this year, Gen Z employees surpassed baby boomer employees in the U.S. Millennials will likely be the most represented generation in the labor market until sometime in the 2040s, and the Gen X employee count will rank second for some time yet. Today we'll talk about what this means for leadership, organizational culture, and the future of business. Before we introduce our panelists, I wanted to share just a bit and a few interesting facts about each generation. And if you're like me, you may hear your generation and think, I didn't know that about myself or about folks I grew up with. So baby boomers, or those born between 1946 to 1964, are the longest living generation in history so far. A quarter of baby boomers identify as caregivers. In baby boomers ages 65 to 75, nearly 3 in 10 men and 1 in 5 women are still employed. Some of the events they experienced in formative years included the Korean and Vietnam Wars, Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott, the assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and President John F. Kennedy, and the stardom and death of Elvis Presley. Gen X, or those born between 1965 and 1980, were the first to grow up with cable TV and personal computers widely available. While all the generations experienced economic fallout in the Great Recession and the COVID-19 pandemic, Gen Xers' retirement funds were most affected. Gen Xers were more likely than previous generations to grow up in single-parent households or those where both their parents worked. And that's why they're called latchkey kids sometimes, and they often value independence. Some of the events they experienced growing up include the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Challenger shuttle explosion, the invention of the internet, and the launch of MTV. Millennials, born between 81 and 96, are the largest living generation in the US. A LinkedIn study found that about 16% of millennials won't ask for time off at all, even if it's available, because they're too nervous. The American Psychological Association did a study in 2023 about young Americans and ages 18 to 34 and found that they're reporting much higher stress levels than previous generations, and reported that at a 6 out of a 10-point scale. Growing up, millennials experienced the September 11th terrorist attacks, both dial-up internet and the rise of tech-enabled society, and the Great Recession. Gen Z is the generation born between 97 and 2012, and they're the most racially and ethnically diverse generation in history. Gen Zers are more likely to reside in metropolitan areas, and they're less likely to move than previous generations before them. Almost all Gen Zers have lived their lives fully digitally connected. They're on track to be the most educated generation in history, but they're also simultaneously seeking out jobs, starting their own businesses, or working in the trades to earn more money without needing college degrees. Some of the events Gen Z has and is still experiencing in their formative years included the rise of gaming, the social justice movement, and the legalization of same-sex marriage, an increasingly digital society with almost everyone having a smartphone. So now that we're through these generalizations, I want to offer a caveat that no generation is a monolith. And so our panel today is representative of the 4 groups, but they are certainly not the spokespeople for everybody in their generation. With us today, we have Jay Byers from Simpson College, Liz Cooney, Manager of Inclusion at F&G, John Irving, President of the Central Iowa Division of Tri-City Electric Company, Skylar Mayberry-Mayes, Executive Director of the Jacobson Institute at Grandview University, and Linda Tong, the founder of Linda Tong Planners. So speakers, could you start off with sharing what you think your generation has changed most about the workforce? And we'll start down here with you, Linda.
What my generation has changed most with the workforce. Honestly, in my personal experience, I think our generation really focuses on our own mental health and well-being. We grow up in a time where it's really important. We have all this knowledge of what stress can do to the body and what it can cause later on. So I think it's really important for us to focus on our work-life balance and not putting all of our mental load and all of our focus on work, and have that balance between work life and home life, and also focus on ourselves.
I think what you'll notice today, Emily, is that there will be a lot of overlap and similarities in our responses. But what I would offer is that for the millennial population in particular, I think one thing that we've done extremely well is we've allowed for organizations to adapt to servicing a millennial population of workforce, but also reshaping what it looks like. Things like purpose-driven organizations, B corporations, organizations that have to be socially responsible become more inherent and more important within organizations. And I think especially corporations are starting to realize that if they want to attract a 21st century of population, particularly being millennials.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Emily and the Business Record team, for inviting us to be here today. And as Danielle said a few minutes ago, thank you for all the things you do to inform us and keep us connected in the metro area. I think everybody here would say they're a Business Record fan. If you didn't know, I'm representing the baby boomer generation. If you wonder how I got the assignment, they needed to find a boomer that still had their own vehicle and could drive here on their own so that they wouldn't have to stop and pick someone up and take them back after the event. And the second thing, they wanted someone that could find the place so they wouldn't end up over at 125th Street, which is actually White Line Lofts, and call for help because they left their paper map at home. So that's how I got the assignment. So to answer your question, Emily, one of the biggest thing that baby boomers are known for is bringing the massive workforce the past few years. Our parents had lots of children back in their generation. In 1960, the average number of children in a family was 3.7. In 2020, it's down to 1.6, and that's a topic of a whole other discussion. So a lot of things we bring to the workforce: stability, loyalty to our employers, responsibility, and we've done a lot of good things too. You mentioned a couple of those, including inventing the internet, the Apple computer, and the microwave. So, and if you're a good boomer, I don't know if that's actually a term, but if you're a good boomer, you're also sharing your knowledge with the people you work with of all generations and not just dwelling on the past. And to mention on the other generation that Chris mentioned, the traditionalists, the silent generation, the greatest generations, I think that number is growing. More people are working longer, and there's still a lot of those in the workforce too. And it's not true that us boomers want them to move out of the way. We want to continue to learn from their knowledge and experience, and also we know that that's the group that both political parties extract their presidential candidates from. And before I move on to turn it over to Liz, that was a nonpartisan comment. Before we move on to Liz, I just wanted to apologize in advance to my fellow panelists. If I do fall asleep while you're talking, please don't take it personal. That's just what boomers do at meetings.
How am I supposed to follow that, John? So, yeah, thank you for having me. I am also representing the millennial generation, so I'm going to build off of what Skylar said a little bit. And if we're going to go with the humor, I was joking that I should have zoomed in because most of us are now virtual and remote, and we like it that way. So I think the millennials have also offered, in terms of our internal leadership and the way that we like to operate and manage, a focus on really the vulnerable side of leadership, allowing people to bring their emotions to work, and having a people-centered way of how we manage and lead. And so I think that is one of the ways that we tend to be more team-oriented and want that collaborative way of work. And so we've found different ways to do that, but I think it's important to us that our coworkers, our peers, our direct reports, and our leaders can bring their whole self to work. And we want to model that, and we also want to support that in others. And so I think being vulnerable as a leader was a very new concept, and yet it's how we prefer it and how we try to model that, and it weaves into a lot of the different ways I think that we've contributed to the workplace, just in that sort of micro interpersonal level.
Good morning, everybody. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and just want to echo the comments and appreciate all that Business Publications does for the Greater Des Moines region. It's an important player and an important partner for so many of us for so many years. Great to see Connie in the back as well, too. So, well, first and foremost, I appreciate the fact that Gen X was invited to participate in this, because if you saw my remarks, my written remarks in the sort of preface to this, is I've been to lots of presentations in my career and seen a lot of forums and panels talking about generations, and typically what I would find was Gen X was never represented. There was a lot of discussion about millennials. What happens when the boomers retire? And now Gen Z, and especially in my current position, I'm surrounded by Gen Z all the time with college students. So, by the way, the best way to connect with them is Instagram. So, so I think that, I started sharing some of those thoughts with fellow Gen Xers. So, anyone born between 65 and 80, raise your hands. So did any of you, does that ring with you too? That, but I think typical Gen X fashion, you just sort of put your head down and continue to move forward. So just in general, a couple high-level comments first. One is I think that comment in terms of there's always been this older generation versus younger generation. Younger generation is, doesn't work as hard. They have things that are easy for them. So one of the titles that used to be when Gen Xers were kind of the age of the Gen Zers were the slacker generation. But just generally. And I think also, too, that if you're sort of towards the older end of the Gen Xers, you might be similar to boomers, whereas if you're, kind of the younger generation, you may relate closer to the millennials. And then also, too, I think it's important to say that just because we're talking about these stereotypes, you could be a Gen X or a millennial and be totally opposite, right? These are high-level stereotypes, but I think it is important in the context of DEI to have different generations that are part of your decision-making because people look at different things, different ages, and so forth. So as you're sort of looking through your DEI lens, having a boomer voice, having an X voice, having a millennial voice, having a Z voice is really important in terms of just your overall business strategies. But just overall sort of characteristics of Gen X tend to be independent, entrepreneurial, skeptical of authority, highly value authenticity, highly value work-life balance. I remember that was a big thing, coming out of law school. Appreciate flexibility, and as I said before, just tend to put your head down and grind out your work. And a lot of Gen Xers sort of like to avoid the spotlight. So that's just kind of get her done sort of mentality, and so again, I think that that's really important just to as now so many of the Xers are moving into CEO roles, government positions, and so forth. I think it's important to really take a look and see what really does drive Gen X and who is Gen X, because Gen X really has been that sort of kind of quiet voice. So some other names for Gen X have been, this was mentioned earlier, the latchkey generation, the forgotten generation, the MTV generation, the lost generation, slacker generation, 13th generation, and then I'll say now we're currently in the sandwich generation where we're dealing with right now trying to put our kids through college and now dealing with parents who are failing in health. And so how do you sort of manage all that right now? And every generation goes through that, but Gen X is in the middle of that right now. So I think those are a lot of the concerns that I hear from my coworkers and people that friends and so forth that are currently dealing with all those issues as Gen Xers.
So you all mentioned a lot of different values that are important for each of the generations. I'm wondering if at times any of those values are clashing and how businesses might address that. Anyone can take the question.
Okay, I'll start. I think that a lot of times generation clashes, it's kind of blamed on a generation issue, but sometimes that can happen within its own generation too, because there's always going to be differences in politics and religion and music and adaptation to technology. But if people just learn to respect each other, I think there could be fewer clashes and learn to work together. But I think you're always going to have that within generations and among different ones too.
I would say from my perception, it's kind of a misnomer that the values are clashing. I think that we actually have a lot of values in common, but the way that we talk about them or the way that they show up are different. So a couple examples that I've experienced, I worked with several leaders a few years ago locally that were mostly of the Gen X and Boomer generation, and they were really frustrated and confused by the younger generations not wanting to pick up extra hours, not wanting the overtime on nights and weekends. And so they had this perception that millennials were lazy, that they didn't care. And that was really offensive to them because, you know, they've dedicated their life to this company, and they just don't understand what's happening. And so in conversation with them, I said, I actually think they do care. They care a lot. And again, I'm speaking from, you know, my perception, but the difference is we also care about, you know, our time outside of work. And so the amount of time spent at work does not equal how productive or successful you are. And so they want to work hard, millennials want to work hard and do well and succeed, and then go and do other things outside of work and have that family time community, and they value that as much as their work. And so I think that was an instance where I was able to shift the perception of actually we both value our company and our work and being successful, but we are not willing to give up our time with our family and give that over to work. And so that perception of not caring or being lazy, you know, we kind of worked through that, and they realized, oh no, we do have that same value. And I think the other example, so a lot of my work is in the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and this has been obviously a hot topic lately, and we see companies that are pulling back from those efforts and even changing positions on it, and people are acting like these values are new and that they are somehow hurting our people or the economy. And I think about, you know, my parents' generation growing up in the 60s and leading the efforts in women's rights, civil rights, desegregation, and gay rights. And so we have, you know, maybe different labels for them now, and we are really putting them forward openly in the workplace. But it's no different than my mom advocating for maternity leave because she was the first woman in her company who became pregnant, and they realized they don't have a policy or a benefit for that. How is that any different than us saying, hey, you know what, our adoption benefits should include same-sex couples, right? Like, so these values of wanting to be inclusive and make sure people's needs are being met so we can support them in the workforce, that's always been there. And so I think we've valued that throughout the generations, and the way that it's getting labeled and tossed around is really distracting us from what we all care about, which is we want to be successful, we want to show up to work as our whole selves, and we want to be able to feel supported in those efforts.
The one thing I would offer is also, you know, when it comes to the clashes within the generations, I think part of it also, to Liz's point, is the organic ability to connect multi-generationally within the workforce, with an emphasis on organic. You know, I think some of the organizations that do this well have put in place policies and practices to where meetings have multiple generations within those meetings so that innovation is fostered. Those organizations that do well have reverse mentoring programs so that the CEO is mentored by early career professionals and maybe even interns. The organizations that do it well build spaces where multi-generational differences exist organically. And if organizations do not do that, all you have to rely on are the assumptions and the generalizations that you have about those generations. So I certainly encourage that if you are recognizing clashes within the organization, build spaces where the organic conversations can happen so you can recognize that at the end of the day, the values are truly aligned and the impact is greater that way.
I can definitely agree with both Gen Xers. It seems like with every generation that is new and upcoming, we kind of just are perceived as lazy or not hardworking, when with the rise of technology, things have become more efficient. So that's a really important value. And I've noticed with that it comes to clashes when I'm talking with different business owners, as one myself. They have a different, they lived a different type of grind while they were growing their business. They were working more than 40 hours a week. They were always thinking about their business, just putting that extra effort or more hours into it than someone like me who values my own time and the fact that I have that freedom of time. I take advantage of it. I have the freedom to be able to just focus on my own life rather than separate that from my business. So that's just something that I think we just have to accept, that we're always going to have those different values. We're always going to, be wiser than the generation below us.
Anything you'd add, Jay?
I think these are all excellent points. I think just in terms of, creating those spaces is important with, whether it's sort of standing committees or task forces. I think that that's really excellent advice, and definitely agree that, these are issues that, the issues that continue to be leading edge, right? I mean, that's, as Liz had mentioned, I think that's definitely very true. But I would just add to that, it's like how you communicate as well too, because there's different, people, different age groups respond differently to different forms of communication. So as a leader, how are you connecting with different, other than, just emails or through social media or through in-person, those sort of things, right? Because different generations like different means of communication. And so I think that is incumbent upon leaders to make sure that you're using those different channels to be able to connect with as many as you can. And again, as I said before too, I think having that diverse group of age groups creates for better decision-making, more innovation, more creativity.
Can I add one more thing, Emily?
Yeah.
I think each generation brings different life experiences, and each experience means you can see an idea or a problem differently. So if a company can blend those together some way, I think that would eliminate a lot of clashing. And I just wanted to add, Jay, when you asked everybody to raise their hand, I was surprised there were so many Gen Xers out here. I thought the Millennials came after us.
They didn't have the time off of work.
See, part of that reason is because the Millennials' parents were boomers, right? So they want their kids to do well.
I'm glad there's a little joking going on here because I think it's needed. Linda, question for you. A lot of Gen Zers are opting to start their own businesses instead of climbing the corporate ladder, as a lot of folks have done before them. And I was wondering, as an entrepreneur yourself, if you think there's a reason for that.
I think the main reason is being in control of your time, being in control of what you want to do with your life, and also just taking that chance on yourself and not just following what other people are doing. I was lucky enough to be in the position where I had the opportunity to just start my business during COVID, and then I got really lucky and it really blew up from there. Others might not be so lucky, but definitely just having that time, the control of your life, and then, of course, work-life balance.
Mm-hmm. Another question on Gen Z for you, John. I've read articles about a lot of Gen Zers opting for the trades because the trades have changed, but also because of the cost of college education. And I'm wondering, for a younger worker that's entering the trades now, how does the workforce there look different than those jobs when their grandparents sought them out?
Thanks for asking that, Emily. I've read some of those same articles that Gen Zers will fill the skilled trades jobs going forward, which is great because for years the number of skilled trades workers has been going down all the time. It's not an attractive career or a glamorous job when you get out of high school, but COVID supposedly changed the way of thinking for young people's view. When they were stuck behind a computer for days on end, some thought, is this really what I want to do? Do I want a desk or debt? Do I want to do this? So they're starting to, which is great. We've had, as I mentioned, a lack of people entering that. And there's even influencers now posting things they do, and it's during the day, and it's amazing that someone would post a photo of installing a water heater, and they're getting followed. They're trying to show that those trades are not just construction, dirty, grimy jobs. They're professional jobs too, or installing data network installations. So we hope that trend continues, and we hope that the workforce, as they enter it, will accept that more, because the skilled trades are, it's known that they're getting to be more of boomers than anyone else, and some Gen Xers. But we need to adapt to their life too and offer them different opportunities.
Jay, from a college standpoint, what kinds of things are you seeing that Gen Z is seeking out in the workforce?
Yeah, so it's a great question. It's, I'll sort of answer with sort of Gen Z and their parents, and I think it's more incumbent than ever, and Skylar can probably comment on this too, that just in terms of how do you create that value proposition in terms of, is college still worth it, right? And is a 4-year BA degree still worth it? And how do you show that value proposition? And that's really incumbent upon all of us in higher education to be able to continue to show that. And part of that is, I think that definitely some of the shift to looking at apprenticeships and so forth, I think that was healthy. But at the same time, I think some people are making decisions not to go to college for other reasons, for political reasons and things like that. But really, in terms of a 4-year education, in terms of our sort of case to current high school students and their parents, is that going to get a 4-year degree still matters. And if you look at overall life earnings, you'd make significantly more over the course of your lifetime getting a 4-year degree. And by the way, that differential is not getting smaller, it's getting wider. And what are those things that we're teaching in college? These sort of soft skills, or I'd call power skills or life skills, that are going to transcend technology. So, a college graduate now is probably going to have 10, 11, 12 different jobs in different industries, jobs that don't even exist right now. But what kind of tools and education can we provide them with these life skills or power skills? So things like analytical reasoning, written and oral communication, project management, on and on and on. All those things that I think that the 4-year colleges do a very good job at. So that to be able to make that case that it's still worth it, because there's sort of two demographic issues that we're dealing with. One is there's just fewer college-age students, and then fewer college-age students who want to go to school. But those trends can still be beat. So, for example, this year we had our largest first-year class in more than a decade. So again, you can still do that, but really, with issues like student debt and all the other issues that are out there right now, it is really incumbent upon colleges and universities to make that case that it is still worth it. And it can't just be, you should still go to college because it's the right thing to do, because that just doesn't cut it anymore.
Mm-hmm. Skylar, I know in your doctoral research that you looked at millennials who had obtained business degrees and their attraction to employers. What were some of the things you found in terms of what made them want to join a certain business?
Yeah, thank you for the question. There were several themes that emerged from the research, but I would say the one thing that probably was the most fascinating was this desire for non-blurred lines between work and their personal lives. It's not uncommon, and maybe it was really popular and even attractive at a time where organizations said, our culture is like a family. How many of you have heard something like that? And that was very attractive at the time, to say our culture is like a family. And that's perfectly fine until it's time to restructure, reorg, and to lay off. And then that helps populations recognize that maybe I don't want to work for an organization that's like a family if this is what the result is. So in the research, one of those themes being that millennials wanted to have jobs that were meaningful, that were purpose-driven, that allowed them to advance in their careers equitably, not based off tenure or years, but based off skill and competence, and be with an organization that is rewarding them for those reasons versus rewarding them through things like false culture.
I'm curious if you all feel like there's a generational difference at all between how different generations view the role of business in society, in terms of is a business simply a business, or should it have a role in social impact? And do you all feel that that's a generational difference, or is that a person-to-person difference?
I can start with this. You're speaking my language now. This is exactly what my doctoral research was on. So just a quick timeline of how social responsibility evolved over the last century and a half. In the early 1900s, there was socially responsible organizations have always existed. However, the way in which they were perceived has evolved and changed over time. So in the early 1900s, organizations like Macy's, for example, they felt that they had a service and an obligation to community. So they gave money to community, they gave money to charitable organizations. But the difference was at that time, they actually disguised it on their financial statements as miscellaneous expenses because of the sensitivity of an organization giving money to a community when they have a financial obligation and fiduciary responsibility. You then get to the mid-1950s where, this is actually a fun fact, there was a gentleman by the name of Howard Bowen who's recognized today as kind of the father of modern day social responsibility. And the fun fact is that he actually served as a president of the University of Iowa and Grinnell College, so that actually was birthed right here out of the state of Iowa. In this publication in 1953, Howard Bowen actually mentioned that the social responsibility of a business person exists beyond what the person is doing, but how the business does it as well and their corporate citizenship. And that's where we are today. Today, we go from 1900 with Macy's miscellaneously disguising their income statement or their financial statements to today where organizations are literally publishing corporate social responsibility reports to their stakeholders because they recognize that it's important to build clients, it's important to build a customer base, and it's extremely attractive to younger generations.
Does anyone else want to weigh in on that?
I'm not sure if this fits into your question, but one thing about changing times that might is pre-employment drug testing probably at some point needs to change. Our industry is especially, it's mandatory pre-employment for any construction job, and that, I think, deters some Gen Zers from getting into the skilled trades, but it's been this way for a long time, and it's a really controversial topic in our industry, and I'm usually in the minority, but a lot of industries have gotten away from that. Some have allowed certain things. If someone tests positive for THC, you look the other way, and that's, and I'm not endorsing anything, but I think to build workforces, I think a lot of people are missing out on a job because they don't want to quit their job and go apply like it. For us, they have to do a pre-employment test, then if they go to a data center or somewhere else, they got to take another one. Well, you may not want to take that chance. And safety is the number one reason in our industry. We don't want anybody to be injured or someone else, but that's important in every industry, not just ours or the DOT. And, I don't want to get run over by a forklift at Costco or have somebody spill the coffee on me at Starbucks. But every industry needs to be safe, but there's a difference between being impaired and being a social or recreational user of something at some point, because I don't think if we ask that question here, I think everybody would agree with that. So, but it's not just a company thing, it's not just a generational thing. Well, I blame a lot on the boomers, but the federal government still considers marijuana as an illegal substance, which means then you can't work on federal jobs. So if you want to go to work at the Des Moines International Airport because it's got federal dollars in there, what they're doing is a pre-employment, pre-job entry test, which is a non-DOT 5-panel drug test with breathalyzer. Well, if you've looked at a beer commercial or a CBD ad on your phone, they might even catch you with that. But the difference between the non-DOT is that they can do different things, hair swabs, different ways to test. So there's a lot of people that are missing out on jobs because of that. So until it's changed at the federal level, even though it's legal in some states, that's a block that's out there. So I don't know if that fits in your question, but I just wanted to bring that up. Because companies need to look at that differently than they do now.
John for governor.
I think millennials, we watched a lot of our parents and aunts and uncles lose their job in the recession, right? We were graduating from college, we were trying to find jobs, and we saw that folks who had dedicated 20, 30 years were just totally let go. And so I think that really shaped our approach to not having loyalty to companies. And so instead, we do seek out companies who are openly taking a stance on issues, social issues, and saying, yes, we support LGBTQ people. We support people with disabilities. We support Black Lives Matter. And I think there are, even more so with Gen Z, people who are seeking out companies based on those stances and those efforts and how much they are giving back to the community. And I think, I see a lot, Gen Z, our interns this year, one of the groups put together a whole presentation on environmentally sustainable efforts within F&G and the areas that we could improve on. And I think that is of huge importance to Gen Z and the ways that companies are approaching tackling global warming and climate change. And again, that's not new either, right? Like the 1970s was the birth of the sustainability and eco-friendly movement. And so again, these aren't new, but the way that I think younger generations are valuing what they're looking for in companies is based more on that than it is on brand loyalty or company loyalty.
I would just add too, I think these are all excellent points, but I think it's also important that people want to work for what's the core mission of the organization you're working for, right? And how do you articulate that what you're doing matters and makes a difference? Because people want to do meaningful work. They want to be at a place where they can make a difference and that they can lead and they can learn. So how do you tie that to your core business as opposed to just what you're doing in the community in addition, which is important, but what core things are you doing on a daily basis with your company, with your organization? Because people are spending a lot of time working and they want to make sure that what they're doing is having an impact and makes a difference.
Yep, and not even as an employee looking for, a company that cares about those kind of values. You want to work at a place that, if they care about those values, they're more likely to care about their own employees and people. But also as a consumer nowadays, as Gen Zs, we also look for those in companies that we support and those businesses that we purchase from. We don't want to be putting our money towards something that is, contributing to global warming or climate change. We want to be putting our money and our dollars into companies that care about that kind of thing and truly care about their employees as well.
I want to ask each of you if there is a stereotype about your generation that maybe, as Gen Zers would say, gives you the ick. Maybe that's showing my millennial, but is there a stereotype that you think is always associated with the folks that you grew up with that you don't think is true? And let's start down with Jay.
I would say maybe not now, but back in the day that I think I mentioned before the slacker generation, and then I think Gen Xers sort of get tagged with having a lot of angst, and I think that's maybe if you've seen the movie like Clerks or Breakfast Club or and I think that those really sort of bring out some of those stereotypes, but I think that really it just is I think really Gen Xers are in many ways, as I said before, really are skeptical of authority in some ways and truly embrace authenticity and are just sort of grinders and like to put their head down and get work done. And that whole sort of slacker piece, I think, came with, the discussion of the day was that work-life balance. And when I talk about work-life balance, I think it's more of a harmony or more of a blend because there really is, I don't know if there is such a thing as a balance because it always is changing. But I think that that's sort of unfair in terms of, that stereotype of slackers, which that was not really who when I looked around with Gen X, and I saw a lot of people just really working hard and trying to get ahead.
So two come to mind for me, for millennials. The one is still being treated like we are teenagers. Like everybody still thinks millennials are in their 20s and that we're just fresh out of college. Most of us are in our late 30s to late 40s. And high school was 20 to 30 years ago for us. And so still that perception exists, and that's just annoying. The other thing is that we are entitled. and that we are the generation where everyone got a participation ribbon or a participation trophy. And my response to that is, who gave those to us, right? It's not like we asked for them, and we didn't set up our sports programs like that. Y'all did that to us. So, I think that rather than that shaping entitlement, I think that shaped us seeing that equity is important and that people need to be recognized and valued and appreciated for what they contribute, even if it's not the same and even if it's not winning all of the time.
Well, stereotypes in our generation, there's a lot of them because we've been around longer, but if I had to list them, it would be several pages, but some of the most that are probably not true for all, but we've been known to deny climate change. We don't like self-checkout because we like to write checks. We,
She says something that's not true.
yeah. It's true. It's true for some. You know, some think we grew up in an era where there were no bike helmets, seat belts, or car seats, so we just bounced around in the back of a station wagon, and that's part of our problem. But, and we talk about the past, and we remind everyone how far we walked to school every day and never missed a day, and things like that. So we get a lot of boomer stereotypes, but it is true for some, not for all.
Yeah, I would say, and this has some truth to it as well, that millennials are job hoppers. But I think when you dig deep enough into understanding why we pivot in our careers more frequently, there's certainly a desire to continue learning as a millennial. And when you don't have opportunities to continue learning, whether that be in formal capacities with your work or through transferable meta skills that allow you to continue learning, you find the way to get it. And sometimes that means pivoting in your career. So, like I said, while there is some truth to it, I don't like it because it seems like we job hop solely for things like salary and benefit when the impetus behind it is much deeper and much more driven.
I was actually surprised to find that my year of birth was considered a Gen Z, because I don't even consider myself a Gen Z. Some of the icks I get, I guess, are maybe the iPad kids. You know, some of us did not grow up on all technology. I didn't have internet until I was in probably 2012 was the time that I finally had internet. So, yeah, there is the assumption that all of us are iPad kids, have very short attention spans, and can't pay attention to anything, but the top half of us is not true.
Related to technology, I'm wondering, John and Jay, if you might weigh in on because millennials and Gen Z have often used technology more often throughout their careers, how have your views of technology as a means for working changed from the beginning of your careers to now?
I think it's changed dramatically. You know, I was born in 1970, so, you know, growing up that, you know, there were no computers in school until probably upper elementary school when we first got like our first Apple IIs. Maybe some of our friends in late 70s were getting like a Commodore or something like that. But of course, nobody had cell phones. And, you know, but we were getting criticized for, you know, playing too much Atari or those sort of things too. So that's the whole video game thing, you know, definitely became a bigger thing. But, you know, definitely that has changed. I remember, when I got my first BlackBerry when I was working for Congress, and those sort of came out after the failure of communication from 9/11. And so congressional staffers started, even though I could only get a signal if I was on like I-80 or I-35, and they didn't have phones phones embedded in them at the time too. So I just think in general it's changed just dramatically. And, you know, I think with all technologies, it's you got to continue to evolve and be, you know, kind of be on the front edge of those things, and it's continuing to change dramatically. But I think that, you know, definitely the Gen Xers, you know, a lot of them grew up with minimal technology, with, you know, the landlines, to what we see today where everybody's, you know, carrying around a supercomputer in their pockets. And so, but again, those technologies are going to continue to rapidly change, and I think it's incumbent upon all of us, you know, if we're sitting here 20 years from now, what are we going to be talking about? But it's going to be different, and I think that it's incredibly important for business leaders and community leaders to continue to be on that front edge of technology and continue to use those tools that are going to be most effective.
Well, technology's changed our industry in a big way. Number one, the design of projects. There's several architects in the room, and they'd agree with me. It used to be you had a big set of blueprints you unrolled, and everybody had paper plans. You printed them on 24 by 36 so the boomers could read them. And now everything is done on, BIM, CAD. It's done on a computer screen. You can go to a lumber store, they'll design your house and do 3D modeling. There's a lot of different ways, and that's really changed our industry the most. Mm-hmm. And there is, one more thing. There's one of our competitors runs an ad regularly in the Business Record. I'm glad they do that, but it's one man standing there with a roll of blueprints. And I thought, I hope they keep running that, because that's kind of dates them. And he's not, I know him well, he's not here, but he's not a boomer either.
Well, one of the things that I had mentioned when discussing the different generation makeup is that American Psychological Association study that found that younger people, particularly millennials and Gen Z, report higher levels of stress than previous generations. But what I've been hearing is that millennials and Gen Z are trying to prioritize work-life balance and their mental health more. So I'm curious, why is there still that discrepancy then, do you think?
Okay, I'll take that one. I think that the Gen Zs will help bring more of a focus on mental health issues. That's been something that's missing in our generation. In the construction industry, we have the second highest rate of any profession of suicides. We just had, a couple months ago, we lost a young guy who committed suicide, and he had a girlfriend and a young baby. But no one predicted it, no one knew. But in our industry, if you bring up something, it is considered like, what's wrong with you? You got to be a tough person if you want to be in this industry, and that's sad. And I was at a conference recently, and we had a session on mental health, and they had a testimonial from a lady, and I'm sure she was in the boomer category, but she said she suffered from mental health issues all her life and never sought help, and she evidently didn't have any family support, but her company had started adding an EAP program to it, and she thought about it for the longest time, and she went to her employer and said, I need to use this, because she was at a breaking point. And she went in for treatment, and then she told him this testimonial, and I don't know where she was from, but she said that was the first time in her life she felt like she had help. But another sad part of it was, she said, in her company, every time somebody went to the hospital, had surgery, had a baby, they'd get flowers, they'd get cards, people would visit them, they'd come back, their workspace would be decorated. She says, I never had one visitor, and when I came back, no one said anything. And that's something I think we need to change, because we need the generation coming up to make sure that doesn't happen to others. Some don't make it through those problems.
I think one thing that comes to mind for me with millennials and Gen Z valuing the openness around mental health and the need for more services and better coverage and all of that comes from the fact that, we were told, get the 4-year degree, graduate, and you will be successful, and you can buy the house, you can get married, you can have the kids, right? Like we were told this narrative, and we followed that narrative, most of us, and it didn't work out. We ended up with so much school debt and not the jobs that can help pay, like that equal paying those off. And so in focusing on that, not being able to move forward with home ownership at the same sort of timeline that our parents did. And so you have this stress of, well, I'm not living up to what I thought I was supposed to. I'm trying to have it all, but there are these real barriers that are preventing me from accomplishing that. And it's taking a huge toll on my mental health, and realizing we have to talk about that, and we have to take care of that. And so I think it's this just sort of gray area of realizing our generation is facing differences, and we were, given advice based on the circumstances that our parents had, and so it's to no fault of them, but our reality is quite different. And so I think the fact that we can't have it all in the same way, we are pivoting and realizing, okay, what do we need in order for us to be able to continue, right? And to be healthy parents and neighbors and coworkers, because we don't have that luxury, and we have to be able to manage all of these things. So I think, and I think Gen Z even more so, right? Like having gone to school and started a career in a remote environment, and the amount of anxiety within Gen Z is the highest among any generation. Their financial concerns are the highest among any generation, and so that just is continuing, and it's, I think, why we see this desire and this push for more work-life balance, which is totally false. And so I think I like the phrase work-life boundaries, because that's more realistic, right? And that is where we can have somewhat of improvement on what our generations are dealing with in order to feel like we have that fulfillment that we were told growing up that we could have.
Linda, I'm curious for your business being so social media heavy. I know that that's obviously a great thing for your business, but also social media can have an impact on mental health. And I'm curious if there's a part of this mental health challenge for the younger generations is the constant tie to technology that was maybe different for previous generations.
Definitely. We're on our phones all day, comparing ourselves to other people all day, comparing our lives to other people's lives who are just, exaggerating, how great it is, especially on social media. It's really easy to see that exaggeration. Everything's edited nowadays. Now with AI, some people can't even tell what's AI, what's not. So I would definitely agree with the fact that social media is something that is taking a toll on our mental health, and I try my best to just stay off of it, but it's just one of those things that you kind of have to take at your own toll. Some people need to take a break from it, and that's something that I usually do if I need to take a step back and just realize what's real and what's not in terms of my business and then my also personal life.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just add, we've had a lot of talk about mental health too. If you've not read the book Anxious Generation, you all need to read that. If you're trying to get a handle on working with Gen Z in the workplace and some of the things that they're dealing with, it's a top 10 seller. It has been a top 10 bestseller, but if you read one book from today's presentation, read that book.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of the technology side of things, when it comes to AI, are there generational differences in the workforce in terms of should it be implemented and how?
I think it can be a useful tool in terms of efficiency, but I can definitely see why it can be worrisome for certain jobs where all of a sudden there's no more need for that job. It's kind of a worry.
This is something we talk about in higher education often, and it really boils down to the intent behind it. And I think there are some generations that believe utilization of AI leads to academic integrity issues. I in my other job, actually teach at the University of Northern Iowa, and I have had first-year business majors for the last 5 years. And I actually encourage them to use AI. When we think about skills that are obsolete and skills that will become obsolete in the future, I was talking to a friend yesterday who also teaches at the collegiate level, and we were talking about just the use of AI in a classroom and for assignments. And what we agreed on within that conversation was that skills are changing. When I was in middle school, it was told to me that if I didn't know how to write in cursive, I was gonna be a failure. And I don't know how many of you nowadays write in cursive, but I can tell you what, I still do it, and people can't read it. So the skill was obsolete. And we think about things that are super important for us today, like being able to write a sentence clearly with strong grammar. And I understand it's important today, but is it more important to understand how to prompt artificial intelligence to populate what you actually need as it relates to narrative? Things are changing over time, and if we don't get on board with how things are changing, we as organizations also become obsolete.
To quote a past business record event, I think it was the economic forecast luncheon, that there was the discussion about AI, and there was different examples where an Iowa-based company had used a company to write a manual for a piece of their equipment, and one of the Iowa State University economists was on the panel, and she was researching a topic and found herself posted in there as a writer of this article, which she didn't write. So the conclusion was that they all recommended use AI and get used to it, but treat it like an overly eager intern and check.
Yeah, I don't know if I see it necessarily as a generational difference, because I think it's so new and it's happening so fast for all of us. I think it's just like the rapidness of any new technology and the changes of, you're gonna have those early adopters, and then you're gonna have, you know, the bell curve of most of us, and then the laggards. And I think the fact is it's not going away. So learning to use it and using it effectively and ethically, and knowing, you know, kind of the safeguards around it from a business standpoint of educating your workforce to not put proprietary and confidential information into ChatGPT. It's like a good starting point, but not everybody is even there, right? And so I think we're going to see a lot of differences across industries. I use it, quite frankly, all the time as a idea generator. I have conversations with it because I think it's helpful in that sort of ideation processing. And I'm a writer, and I fear, you know, how many people are using it, you know, to just write articles, and that it's not being, you know, touched by human hands. But I think we're going to see it across the board in various ways, continuing to evolve. And so learning how to use it and working together on how best to bring it in-house to your companies or to your industries is important. And it's, you know, it is making huge strides. And the other thing, not necessarily AI related, but going back to the technology question that I wanted to tap into was, and Linda, please correct me if I'm wrong from a Gen Z representation perspective, that there's a perception that Gen Z is so good with technology. And my experience with some of my Gen Z coworkers is it's not all technology, and they're used to, you know, a lot of the apps and the social media and texting and all of that. But when it comes to like business technology, like even using Outlook as an email, you know, how to set reminders, how to use your calendar, like that was new to many of them, and how we operate in some of the systems internally as a company were new. And so I think we need to also be careful that we're not making these assumptions that younger generations do know everything that there is to know about technology, and they're fine. There's also going to be that education piece too of, you know, we're all learning in different ways, and I think we can help each other. And that's one of technology is hard for everybody, right? We've all been in those presentations where the PowerPoint's not working and the microphones are going in and out. So I think we can benefit from each other in that way.
I'll just add that, you know, it is important, you know, for higher ed to continue to lean into AI and other new technologies. At the same time, you know, as Skylar mentioned, maintaining that intellectual and academic integrity is important as well. But I mean, I think back to when I was in law school, right, and when it was, you know, all about, you know, utilizing tools like Lexis and Westlaw, where you had some of the old timers who were like, well, you know, you really should be able to do this with books and so forth too. But it's like you got to continue to evolve. So, you know, with any organization, you know, you can put your head in the sand, become a dinosaur, or you can, you know, continue to be on that leading edge. But I also do think it is, you know, you can learn a lot from generation to generation because, well, I agree with what Liz had said on certain technologies, but there are a lot of technologies where it comes natural to them, and to utilize them within your organization to help identify which of these tools we should be embracing, how to embrace them, and not be afraid to experiment, right? And sometimes some are going to work and some aren't going to work, but I think that that's all about innovation and continuing to move forward, and as organizations are moving forward, you know, what can you do to be on that leading edge? Because again, it's your competition's doing that, so you got to be able to take chances.
You all have mentioned some of the different priorities for each generation, and I'm curious from a business leadership standpoint, how as a leader do you create an organizational culture or benefits that meet all of these priorities when not all of them are the same by generation?
I mainly hire part-time employees, but I mainly focus on what their needs are. I think it's important to put, their health over the business. Like orders can wait a day to go out if you are sick. So that's something that I keep in mind, and I think I pride myself in the fact that I have a really good relationship with my employees, and that I can still be in good terms with them 4 years later, even if they're no longer working for me.
I'm fortunate to be able to be in this body of work literally every day with the Jacobson Institute at Grandview, and I have a very supportive leader who recognizes that innovation has to take place in order to remain relevant. The Jacobson Institute at Grandview University, our purpose is to prepare, produce, and pivot future-ready workforces through non-degree seeking and non-credit bearing education. So we're offering bite-sized micro-learning opportunities through different modalities. But the beauty of this all, as I mentioned, is prepare, produce, and pivot. So we're hitting all generations, literally from those who are preparing to go into the workforce, from those who are in the workforce that are expected to produce at levels that align with technology and society, as well as those who are, pivoting in their careers and pivoting outside of workforce, whether that be retirement, mothers going back into the workforce, formerly incarcerated populations. These are agnostic of generation, so it's truly hitting on all generations throughout the continuum of workplace.
I think some companies need to watch when they have a leadership change. I think that's an important time to blend the generations. Usually it's because of a retirement or a change in the department, and that's when the generational shift can happen. It can be blamed on the generations not working together, but if a company doesn't implement it right and realize that may happen, because when one leader changes, that means the generation below them, it might be younger, the people that have been there longer might feel like I'm not needed, and all of a sudden you've got this clashing going on. So I think that's an opportunity for companies to think, when we change leadership, how will this affect the whole organization of the company? Because it doesn't have to be a boomer. It could be a person in the early 40s that's been there for 15 years because that's their only job they have. Another thing that complicates businesses the problems might get blamed on generation communication issues is when there's family members in a business, which is very common in privately owned businesses. When the family members move around, that might restrict some of the flow of the company too. So I think when that happens, I think companies need to look at the generational issue and say, how will this affect us there, rather than just how will this person bring something different?
Communicate. I think so many things come back to how we are communicating expectations, values, needs, and at F&G we've seen rapid growth over the last 4 or 5 years, and the bulk of our workforce, over 60%, is Millennial and Gen Z, and over 80% of our workers are remote, and so there's a lot of differences when we see how people like to work and their approach to work. And so communicating from leaders what those expectations are, the best way to get a hold of people, the way you want to collaborate looks different in a hybrid or a remote environment. And so I think, going back to the earlier question, we have a lot of shared values. There's a lot of common ground. How we talk about those, the way that we implement them, and the way we see them show up, it just comes down to, I think, a lot of the way we communicate and the way we work through some of those challenges interpersonally and organizationally.
I'll sort of answer it from kind of both the student perspective and then from the employer perspective. So students, Simpson's had a long history of educating adult learners, folks who are coming back into that want to try something different in their career path, or maybe they've had some college and they want to complete that. There's roughly 80-some thousand people in the region that have had some college but haven't completed a degree, so there's a huge market for that. But what we found has been, a lot of that used to happen in person, and definitely that most of the adult learners now want to get that education online, and so we've continued to evolve to create most of our adult degree seekers with online opportunities. And I would just sort of build on what John had mentioned, in terms of the workplace. I think succession planning is incredibly important, right? Both sort of, you're sort of hit by the bus plan, what's going to happen if one of your senior leaders is gone or any of your leaders, but then also what do you continue to do to give people in your workforce the opportunity to say, hey, someday I might want to be this VP, or and what are they doing to make sure that they're continuing to have those opportunities that maybe 5-10 years down the road that they could be filling into those roles, because I do think that promoting from within is very powerful if you can do that. But I think it's important for your key positions to have that intergenerational connection, both with, okay, what if I need to replace this tomorrow, but what if I have to replace this position in 5 years?
I want to give our speakers a moment to think of a quick final thought as we're rounding out our time here, and let you all know about a few upcoming events that we have at BPC. Our Fearless annual celebration is next week on October 30th at the Des Moines Marriott. The DSM unveiling is on November 4th at Stivers Ford. And Sages Over 70 is on November 12th at the FFA Enrichment Center. So I want to give you each a chance to give a quick thought to round us out. We'll start with you, Linda.
I think just a good thing to take away from this is just be open to what each generation can offer in your workplace and everything else.
Yeah, I'll close by saying, I think it was a little bit of a joke when Don, Marty, and Danielle came up to give the sponsor remarks, and you kind of joke about Don being a millennial and things like that. But I think those are the types of things and those are the types of interactions that really embrace multi-generational, intergenerational experiences. I think doing things like that, I know I've joked a little bit here with John throughout this panel and have enjoyed it. But as we continue to be comfortable talking about these things, continue to be comfortable existing within each other's spaces and having those conversations, I think that's the best thing that an organization can do during these times, as opposed to avoiding things and avoiding conversations that need to be happening.
I think that generations get along better than we give ourselves credit for. Most companies have blended generations, and sometimes the issues are sometimes created in the company level rather than the groups, because I think everybody here would say they like to work with people of all ages, just not someone within 4 years of their own age. So I think that with planning the company structure, I think that could help the issue, as we said. And we've had a little fun poking fun at our own generations, and the other generations do that for us. So that's common, and that's kind of fun too. It's okay to do that. And to close, I have one more bit of boomer humor. Emily, how many boomers, baby boomers, does it take to change one light bulb?
I have no idea.
None, because they stand around talking about how good the last one was. Oh, and I even have one more, sorry.
Okay, boomer.
I'm sure Emily can answer this one, so we'll see if we can stump her again.
Okay.
What's the difference between a baby boomer and an avocado?
Is it something about toast with millennials?
No. One is a soft, wrinkly vegetable, and the other is an avocado.
Wow.
Again, how am I supposed to follow this? So a couple weeks ago, I just want to share briefly, my niece, who is turning 13 in a couple months, unprompted, asked me, Aunt Lizzie, why do you and my parents' generation, why do millennials think that you're better than us? And I said, what do you mean? Tell me more. And she goes, well, you guys all think that you're better than us because you didn't grow up on iPads, and so you just think you're better. And I said, okay, well, maybe it's coming across that way, but I think there's concern, right? I think we don't understand what it's like for you because we know what it was like to have our childhood before this amount of technology. And so there's concern of what this is going to do for you socially and developmentally. And so, first of all, it was just, I think, amazing that the curiosity of a 13-year-old is already talking about and noticing these differences, because she also has twin little sisters who are the generation below her. And so she's on that cusp of like born 2012, so she's technically Gen Z, but you know, she's seeing it from all these sides. And having the conversation, I think, was, to me, the first step into understanding one another and putting aside some of those myths or misconceptions. And so I think my final thought is that every single generation, every single person, we want to feel heard and we want to be understood. And that's where my niece was coming from. That's where I was coming from in trying to respond to her. And I think we deal with that every single day with the people we work with and interact with. Everybody wants to feel heard and understood. And so listening and seeking feedback and finding the humor across the generations is what's going to help keep us connected and keep us learning and growing.
Excellent, excellent. I'm going to read a quote here. And you can guess who said this. Our youth love luxury, they have bad manners and despise authority, they show disrespect for their elders and love to chatter instead of exercise. Young people are now tyrants, not the servants of their household. So Socrates was credited with saying that. I don't know if he actually said that, but for those of us in Gen X, we would call him Socrates, right? From Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, right? But that being said, I guess my final thoughts are really a call to action for those of us who are in Gen X. I think that for many, many years, those of us who have been in the Des Moines community have been the beneficiaries of really strong leaders who are philanthropists, CEOs, elected officials, and that with the baby boomers retiring, a lot of these really strong, vocal, high visible leaders have kind of moved on to, you know, sort of post-professional lives, and we're seeing more and more of that. So for those of you who are in the room who are Gen Xers, now's the time to step it up, right? We need to step it up as leaders in our businesses. You need to step it up as leaders in community organizations, because a lot of the great things that have happened in this community are because of people who have gone before us. And every generation goes through this, but now it's our turn to step up and really be those leaders, be visible. You know, if you have some of those traits that are traditional Gen X, in terms of, maybe, just keeping your head down, just doing your thing. That is not what our community needs right now. We need strong, powerful leaders, and we need Gen X to step it up because, again, the last generation did a lot for this community. If you look at all the things that have happened in the last 20 years, it's due to strong leadership, and now it's up to us.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for sharing your insight with us today. And thanks again to our sponsors for making this possible and our audience for coming out today. We hope you have a great day.